Welcome to another episode of Systematic Geekology. This is a space where we seek to create and cultivate healthy conversations between those things we geek out on and the philosophical and theological questions that often arise out of our fandoms. Like, what does it mean to be human? What makes a hero? What makes a villain? How do the stories and narratives we geek out on shape how we live in the world? We are your priest to the geeks. We aren't all ordained, but we see ourselves as mediators at the intersection of geek culture and going deeper in our faith. We don't always have to agree, but we do respect each other, and we see everyone as a beloved child of God. Everyone geeks out on something, so come geek out with us and enjoy the show.
You're listening to an Anazao Ministries podcast. Are you after fortune and glory? Or do you prefer to seek after the spiritual and mystic? Well, guys, we're going to be asking, what is it that you value most? As we continue our religion and fandoms series, we're going to be talking about the religions that are depicted in the Indiana Jones franchise. I couldn't possibly be more excited for this episode. Indiana Jones is one of my favorite franchises of all time. My favorite movie of all time is part of this franchise. And as if you're watching, this isn't on YouTube. If you've ever seen any of our YouTube videos, you'll notice I have Indiana Jones just hanging behind me on a giant movie poster behind me. He's a big part of my life. One of the films is foundational to my own character. We're going to talk about that some a little bit later, but I couldn't do this alone. I'm joined by the one and only, one of our newer hosts. Really excited, especially as this might get a little more philosophical, a little more theological. We have the one and only Matthew Winter.
How you doing?
Doing good, man. Excited to have you on. I'm gonna cheat. I'm gonna do two things I'm geeking out on recently, and they're very different parts of the spectrum. So just kind of show my own character a little bit. Right now, preparing for another Religions and Fandom episode, listeners requested that we do God of War. So I've decided I should play God of War. So I went and found a very cheap one, the PS4 version, and playing through that now. And at the same time, just realized Monsters at Work and Monsters Inc. TV series on Disney Plus. Season 2 just dropped. So I'm like, I'm really into Monsters at Work and also God of War, which couldn't be more different, I don't think. But that's where I'm at right now.
Monsters Inc. is fun. I might have to look at that.
It's great. The show is surprisingly good. I didn't love Monsters University, but I do really like the show. So take that for what you will. Matt, what you been geeking out on lately?
Let's see. I'm just trying to think. It's weird thing to geek out on, but I've actually just been geeking out on understanding the effects of like routine and stillness and those sorts of things. It's interesting. As someone who's more free-spirited, I've always fought against the idea of having any kind of like rule of life or structured devotions or whatever. I'm like, okay, you know what? God is going to do what he's going to do in me, and it's just going to happen. But, yeah, I don't know. So just studying silence and stillness and meditation and those sorts of things. And then I'm trying to think media-wise. I've started to play through Breath of the Wild again, since I'm the Zelda guy. So, and I haven't touched Zelda at all since my playthrough of Tears.
Oh, okay.
I kind of stepped away from it for a while, but jumping back in with that, what happens is I get on the YouTube rabbit trail. So
that's fair.
So lore videos, fan theories. All of the stuff. So I'm not just playing the game. This is consuming hours and hours of my day, even when I'm not playing the game. So I'm in just full Zelda mode right now.
I do somewhat similar thing with God of War. And really, I would have never done this if it wasn't for Kingdom Hearts. because Kingdom Hearts has so much of the lore that's only on like random like phone games and stuff. That's like I just gonna watch the YouTube video. The next thing I know, I'm like, I want to watch all the YouTube videos. And now I'm doing it with God of War because I'm like, something will come across. And, I'm started on the PS4 versions. I haven't played any of the originals, and I'm like, well, I need to know some of the background here. So I start looking it up. Best place to look it up is on YouTube. So you just end up doing these little rabbit holes, and it's a lot of fun. I really can't wait for that episode next month. That's gonna be great. Also next month you're doing a Zelda politics episode. Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
I am. That's
Hyrule
right.
Kingdom.
I forgot about that.
What are the politics there? Tune in next month to find out, everybody. Oh man, we have a lot of fun stuff in the works. I do want to go ahead and let everybody know that you can rate and review our show on Podchaser. That helps a lot. If you're on your laptop, just go over to Podchaser, leave a rate and review. It helps the algorithms think that we're important, whether we are or not. We can trick the computer into thinking we are. Same thing. You rate and review on Apple Podcasts. If you're on Spotify, hit the 5-star and the little bell to let you know when we drop episodes. And if you ever do go to YouTube, make sure you subscribe over there for Will's sake. We'll need it. It makes him very happy. Also, we want to thank one of our supporters. You can support the show on Apple Podcasts, Captivate, or on Patreon. And we want to shout out Aaron Hardy for supporting the show. We couldn't do this without listeners like you. Finally, last thing I have to plug, if you want to hear more of this religion series of like religions and fandoms, there's a link in the description down below. You can click that. You can see all the other episodes we've done. Both of us have been part of other episodes, I think. Maybe Matt might have only been primarily political. I don't know. I get the two confused. Politics and religion. They're so close, right? Anyway, on to our regular episode. Oh man, I can't wait for this. Matt, I'm going to throw this to you first. When did you first see Indiana Jones?
Gosh, sometime in my childhood. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I think the first two. Let me look this up real quick. I know for certain. I know for certain that the first two were out before I was born. I'm not sure when.
I feel
Last
like
Crusade
all
came
three
out.
were dropped at least by the 80s, right?
Yeah. So the first two were older than I am, and then I was 3 when the third one came out. So.
Oh.
But yeah, I have been seeing them my entire life. Now, sorry, but as a kid, watching it with my parents, we would watch Raiders, and then we would watch Last Crusade. We never watched Temple.
Interesting. I think Temple's the first one. It's also, for those who are wondering, this is my all-time favorite movie, is Temple of Doom. And what's interesting, I'll get into why here a little bit, but it's the first one I remember. I'm sure I saw the other ones first. The reason it's the first one I remember is because I remember having nightmares as a kid of that guy pulling the heart out of someone's chest.
Right. Yep. Which is exactly why we didn't watch it when I was a kid, or at least I didn't get to see it. I watched it on TV later because it was on like HBO or TNT or one of those, that shows movies. But I was like 12 or 13 by the time I saw it, and it was no big deal. But so I didn't see that one until later.
Yeah. So just kind of walking through more of my history. So I saw that. I watched the other two. And of course, I watched the fourth one when it came out. For a long time, I denied its existence because I was very mad about it. I did not like it. It wasn't a couple years ago.
Really?
Someone fixed it and actually reignited my love of Indiana Jones. When Temple of Doom, what I remember of it being young is that was my first exposure to another religion. And that's just something I was deeply curious about and interested in. I was like, what is this? Who is Shiva? Who's this? Who's that? So as a kid, that was kind of like, for those who don't know, even outside of like my own being religious and being spiritual, I like studying religions just as a concept. I just think it's interesting to look at what people believe and how we came to where we are in that. Like even Christianity, I think it's fun to take myself out as someone who participates in it and to study it just as, here's what it is, here's how it came to be, here are the different artifacts and all that. Like, it's just fun for me. So I remember that kind of being my first exposure to that kind of thing. Even when I was in college, I took archaeology of religion classes because I was like, I love this. In another world that no one convinced me that there's not a career in that, I probably would be teaching archaeology right now and calling myself Mr. Jones occasionally. So I've always loved the series. Fourth one came out, didn't love it. It was a couple years ago. I was at Matthew's Comic Con for this podcast. doing this podcast at a Comic-Con, someone came up to me and challenged me and explained Indiana Jones isn't just fun action adventure that I've always loved, but actually, and I had to actually look this up, this is all like true. So when I looked it up, I was like, oh, I rewatched all of them and have a whole new perspective on the series. They are meant to be criticizing the films of the time. That is the point of Indiana Jones. So like when you go through the first one, you see him like picking out these themes of the action war hero and different genre that was popular at that time. The second one, you see these themes of James Bond is pretty much the whole first part of the movie. And then you get into Rambo later on and it's just critiquing what the movies are. And then the third one, you have the buddy cop film and they even bring Sean Connery, the James Bond in. And I'm like, oh, wait, that's what these are doing. So when the fourth one comes in and sci-fi is the big thing at the time, of course it's aliens. Like it couldn't not be. That's what the movies are about, is critiquing films of the time. And I'm so glad that he introduced me to that. So when the fifth one came out and a lot of other people had toxic reactions to it, I'm going in thinking, I bet they're going to do like some deep fake age stuff and it's going to look terrible because it's supposed to. And then I'm like, I bet they're going to do some weird time travel stuff because that's what's happening right now in all of our movies. Like that's what Endgame was, right? Like that's the big movie at the time. And I'm like, go in. And that's exactly what happened. And they did it perfectly. And I was like, oh, this is it. So even the parts to me, and this is like maybe the ultimate cop out that I'm like, I didn't love in Indiana Jones, like those last two movies, there are parts I didn't love. I'm able to look at it and go, oh, but they exist because they're doing something. They're critiquing something. So it's like the ultimate cop out. And I love it. I'm like, this is great. This is fun.
I like the new one. I mean, I saw it in theaters.
Oh, yeah, I saw it twice in theater.
Yeah, I don't mind it at all. In fact,
the fourth one or fifth one, or both?
The newest one.
Okay,
the fifth one, the one that just came out. What, last year, the year before, whenever it was
great.
The Dial of
Destiny. Yeah,
Dial of Destiny. Which, like, I know you love Temple, and I get that. To me, Dial's the third best movie.
Okay. So Temple of Doom's number one, and then Crusades, and then
no.
That's funny. Oh, that's funny. Oh man, no, I loved Dial of Destiny.
Crusade, Raiders, Dial, probably Temple, and then Crystal Skull.
Yeah.
Just because
I get Crystal Skull being last at least.
Even the and I personally actually prefer the plot of Crystal Skull to Temple of Doom.
Oh. Ew.
But Temple of Doom is just so entertaining and it's so fun that it kicks it up over Dial for me.
Man, I love the plot in Temple. And it's, the whole thing of it, like forming so much of my life of wanting to study religion and do archaeology. So it's like, I am very biased and I recognize that I'm biased. Yeah. And so that was the thing when Crystal Skull came out. Part of my terrible reaction too was because in my mind, these films were action adventure and commentary on religion, because you had Judaism and then Hinduism and then Christianity and then all of a sudden sci-fi. And I was like, wait, that's not, one of these things don't belong.
It's sci-fi action adventure, dude.
Yeah. Well, eventually I figured out that's not the point. It's fine.
That is one movie genre.
Yeah.
Sci-fi action adventure, or what is it? Sci-fi fantasy adventure.
Yeah. It was just,
it's all one.
Weird when the others were all about religion to all of a sudden, or religious artifacts, to all of a sudden have one that really wasn't. But now that I understand what the point of the films were, they were trying to critique a thing. They weren't just trying to teach us religion. I was like, oh, okay. But actually, this is good now. I was just wrong.
But if you're not religious and you don't believe in any of it anyway, isn't it all just science fiction?
Or fantasy.
It
all belongs in Star Wars, science fantasy. Oh, man. So as a whole, how would you rate the franchise if you were doing like 0 to 10?
Oh, man. I mean, it's one of the iconic franchises of all time. It's just, it's probably being a 90s kids and just being like one of the sets of movies that my family watched every year. Yeah. So we'd bust out a VHS, and every year we'd have a Indiana Jones.
As everyone should.
So Star Wars was the Star Trek movies. Mm-hmm. The first 6 with the original cast, and then Indiana Jones. Yeah. Like we cycled those every year. And then and then whatever Disney and whatever else was out, but those weren't nearly as formative.
Yeah. So what are you going with if you had to put a number on it?
The series as a whole does include Crystal Skull.
I like Crystal Skull now. At least it's just still my least favorite.
Yeah, I don't hate it.
But the bottom of perfection. That's what I'll call it.
Yeah,
yeah, it's hard.
Probably an 8.
Oh wow.
Like I want to say 7.
Oh wow.
It's just my.
We have very different ratings.
The way I rate things is insane. I don't think that on my own list, I don't think a 10 exists. Yeah. So I will say that because I look at everything. I look at performance. I look at special effects. I look at plot. I look at the script. I look at how does it make me feel? Like what is the human aspect as far as like emotion and all of that stuff. So, which is what I typically struggle with action movies because they're one note so much of the time.
Yeah, which is what's nice about these is that they have that part, and you can watch Indiana Jones just as action films. You could also see them as like meta narratives commenting on all of film. You could see them as romance thing. Like there's a lot to them.
So between 7 and 8, probably 8, just because again, this is the series as a whole. So we're including Crystal. And we're including Temple. The reason I bring that up is kind of what marks it down for me. And I understand it's the point of it because it is commentary. But that movie's very campy.
That's great. That's funny.
Which I understand that's the point. But even still, that camp kind of brings it down a little bit for me. So I think 7.5.
All right. If I'm going 0 to 10, rating the franchise as a whole, I'll do two different. If I'm going with how I feel and what I want, it's like an 11 out of 10. There isn't such thing as something that's better than Indiana Jones. Like you can't convince me it exists. I love Star Wars. It's one of my favorite series ever. But if I'm doing Star Wars as a whole, it includes the prequels. It includes some of the sequel stuff that I'm not a huge fan of. And it's just kind of like, well, if I'm comparing all of that to Indiana Jones, give me Indiana Jones. I love Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, I put Star Wars between 7 and 8 as well, just so you know.
I love I love Lord of the Rings. And I'm like, Lord of the Rings is almost perfect film, but it's almost like it makes me think a little too much. And it's not like Indiana Jones is layered. I can watch it with my brain off and just enjoy the fighting. I can watch it and like really think about what it's trying to say in the meta narrative. Like it has everything. So for me, I think Indiana Jones is just the best franchise. I'm sorry. I know that's probably a wrong opinion, whatever.
It's up there.
If I'm being more critical, I'd probably give it like a 9.5 out of 10. Cause I do recognize, I think the Lord of the Rings movies are made better. And for those who've seen our show for any period of time, when I do rankings, I'm not saying not grading it. I'm not saying like 90% out of 100. I'm saying more like 10 is the best, 0 is the worst. So I do it almost like comparatively. So if I'm going to say this is the best, it's gotta be a 10, but if I'm doing it critically, I might say Lord of the Rings is technically better. So I might do like 9.5 critically, but 11 personally.
I just think I think of influence and cultural impact and things like that too. And that's why it's definitely, if not the top franchise of all time, one of the top franchises of all time. I mean, Indiana Jones has influenced everything.
Sure. And we're about to get into the meat of what I wanted to talk about today. But before we do, you already ranked yours. I'm going to give my ranking in order. If I'm doing the films from best to least best, because there is no worse, it's Indiana Jones. Best to least best. Temple of Doom is the best one, in my opinion. I'd probably have that closely followed with Raiders of the Lost Ark. Sorry, I keep forgetting this isn't video. Raiders of the Lost Ark is a film poster above my head for those listening, which is everyone. So that would be number 2. Number 3, either Dial of Destiny or Last Crusade. They're both pretty close for me. I might give them a tie. They're both tied. So 3 and 4 are those 2 in whatever order you want. Then last would be the Crystal Skull. Because even though I appreciate it more now, there's just some plot stuff that doesn't quite make sense. There's some way that, like, the swinging through the trees, I was like, it was just a little too out there, even for Indiana Jones. I was like, I don't know about this one. So it ends up at the bottom for me. All right. So with that,
I don't remember that.
Yeah, I've only seen it 3 times. Because originally I watched it, was like, I'll never watch this again. And then it was only like a year or 2 ago that I was like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. No, it's good. It deserves to be included. So it's included now, technically. Yeah. It's bottom of perfection. Still the bottom, though. So one of the things I think that there's a few things I think Indiana Jones tries to ask us. And one is like, what do you value? Are you after the fortune and glory, that classic line, or is there something more important than money and fame? Is it more important? Like, is there a value to just preserving things the way that they are because there's just an innate value in that? What does it mean for something to be sacred to a certain community? I think it's a big question. Even if it's not sacred to you, it might be sacred to someone else. So what is sacred? And then, of course, there's all the movie critique stuff that I think it's also trying to say. So there's a lot that it is trying to say. Before focusing on the religion parts, I'm going to focus down on some of the stuff that maybe isn't the cool meta-narrative stuff. We might do another episode on that later on. But today we're going to focus kind of on that because we're talking about like religion and fandoms. So first, I think we should set some stuff out before we talk about the religions that they cover, just as like ground terms, maybe.
Hello, friends. If you enjoy Systematic Geekology, a great way to support us and to keep us moving forward into the future is to be a patron on our Patreon network. If you're a Patreon, then you get live access to our YouTube exclusives like Comic Book Ketchup and Manga Mustard, Drinks with Tejas, and also some extra content there with our companion series to go along with our annual theme. If you're a patron, you get exclusive merch like t-shirts and handbags and mugs. There's also a bonus extra question that has extra content. In each episode, we go deeper into our faith and the questions that we're wrestling with, but we also do this extra question to jump in and share about, and patrons get to hear how we answer that question. There's discounts on our store. You get access to any future online D&D campaigns. You can easily access all of our Patreon content through our Spotify page where it says exclusive content for subscribers. That could be you folks. And all that being said, you get the satisfaction that you help us keep the lights on and keep us moving forward with our software, our marketing, our equipment, staying current in the podcast game. We love Systematic Geekology. We hope you do too. Support us moving forward. Thank you for all that you are. We know there's a lot of great choices and content out there, and you choose to listen to Systematic Geekology. Thanks, folks. We love you. Peace.
Matt, how would you define what is sacred? Like, how do we understand a thing that is sacred?
Well, sacred, if we look it up, it means connected with God or gods, or dedicated to a religious purpose and so deserving veneration. So something that is sacred is some kind of object or thought or idea that is connected with a deity of some kind. And there's almost always some kind of religious practice or at least veneration that is associated with something considered sacred.
Yeah. So in the movies, Ark of the Covenant is a sacred object. The Holy Grail, the stones, I forget what they call them in here.
Right.
Was it the Sankara stones or the Sivagina? There are things that are like, this is sacred. Even when you go to Dial of Destiny, even though it's not religious, the artifact, the Anacathera, however you say it, the Dial of Destiny, is treated as though it is sacred, even though it's not necessarily religious. And I think for most evangelicals, which is a large part of our hosts, not all of them, but a large part, we don't think of objects as sacred usually. We think of like the text of the Bible as what is sacred. But I think everyone has something that maybe is sacred to them. I would even say, even outside of the realm of religion, and we'll get onto this later, a lot of our current culture in America treat logic and science as if it is sacred. They just might not use the word sacred, but that's how they're behaving.
Or freedom.
Yeah.
Or your political ideals are sacred.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's where, like, when I think of it, it's hard to do. Like, it's almost like there's a spiritual connection to the idea or the thing where it's offensive to be challenged. It's something that you hold so closely that you don't want it challenged. You don't want it touched, which is where I think the Ark of the Covenant is a great stand-in, because if you touch it, you die.
Yeah. And that's, that's interesting. We're talking about religion in the franchise, and it's interesting to me because both the Ark and the Grail are given this power, the power that they're supposed to have. So it's, at least in the world of Indiana Jones, the Bible's true. The Ark does what they say it will do. Mm-hmm. The Grail has power.
Mm-hmm. Well, and that's what's interesting about the Temple of Doom for me too, is because the stone, right? Like when it left that village, you saw sickness and death start entering in. Like it does have some kind of power. And then Dial of Destiny, the dial also had that power to change time.
Sure.
Yeah. Does something have to have real power for it to be considered sacred, though?
No.
Is it just like the power over you it holds, maybe, is what makes it sacred?
To be considered sacred, no. I mean, I can, point to my cat over here and decide that she is sacred, and she is. But, there's a difference between what can be considered sacred and what is sacred.
Yeah. I think, yeah.
And that just gets into like perceived subjective reality versus what is.
Yeah. I think what's interesting, I'm trying to find words to it, because it really is, I think it's harder to define than just a simple definition. Because I don't actually think that I can just pick up my phone and say, I want to start, this is sacred to me now. I think it is something more deep than just your conscious thoughts. Like, I think it's almost like what your identity is wrapped up in. So for the Jewish community, there's a lot of identity wrapped up into the Ark of the Covenant, into the story that comes from. And I think that's what makes it sacred. So when you're talking about the stuff like in modern day politics, there is a lot of stuff that we hold your stance on abortion, your stance on LGBTQ, your stance on this. We hold it so tightly on both sides that it does become what I would consider sacred to you.
It has a significance greater than itself. It is connected to this higher something. Mm-hmm. And really, I think that's what makes something sacred, or at least perceivably sacred, is if the thing is more than just the thing. If it's got some kind of weight or power or connection to something beyond itself.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. No, I agree with that. So, sorry, this might be a little bit of a side tangent, but, one thing we like to do here is when we see something, we're like archaeologists, we got to keep digging. So I feel like there's something here that we're getting at. And I want to just dig a little bit further, do some Indiana Jones work. Would you say, as Christians, that God is the only thing that should be sacred? I feel like it gets into a lot of those questions of like, what is idol worship? Can my Bible be an idol? Can the church be an idol? Can my politics be an idol?
So I'm going to say yes and no, because I think all right. I think there are various, all kinds of a cornucopia even of things that are sacred, but they're sacred because of their connection to God. So God is the source of what makes something sacred or not. But sacredness isn't limited to just God. But all things that are sacred because they're connected with God, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, and that's where it's hard to pick something that's not contentious. Well, one thing that's interesting, I think that can happen, that isn't necessarily right or wrong, in my opinion. I think that a political idea can become sacred for a good reason, whether you're right or wrong. So I'm thinking like, I'm trying to think of something that's not contentious. Everything I say here is going to be contentious. I'm going to go with gun rights. There is a Christian idea that we have freedoms and rights, and we should hold on and protect ourselves. And there's a lot of Christian ideas into protecting our right to bear arms that could come from a place that you genuinely believe this is of God. This is what God wants. Whether you're right or wrong, I could see that. So that idea becomes sacred to you. And then on the other side, there is this thing of like, we don't need to protect ourselves. We turn the cheek when you get hit, right? Christians are supposed to be persecuted. So there's that side. And then they can take that idea of we don't need a right to bear arms and make that sacred. Then you have two people who call themselves Christians on different sides, holding their political ideas as sacred, that maybe aren't wrong to do so. One of them is wrong in the result. I'm not here to settle that debate, but they can't both be right. So, but it is interesting how those kind of things happen, and they are coming from a good place of trying to honor what you believe God wants of you. And now with that very blurry definition of sacred, another thing I want to settle the terms of, and that I think Indiana Jones makes me ask, and I don't think it's necessarily the goal. I think it was just trying to play it safe. But there is a lot of like, what's the difference of mystic and spiritual? Because you never see the Ark of the Covenant and then God himself comes down. It's like there's this mystic thing of if they touch it, they die, and something happens. And even in Dial of Destiny, they talk about magic or something. And Indiana Jones goes, I don't believe in magic, but I've seen a lot of things that I can't explain in my life. So he very clearly isn't saying, nope, I've seen proof of God. And I think that's intentional that he doesn't say that. But he also isn't saying that there isn't God. So I think the movies try to do this where like they avoid the spiritual and lean into the mystic. But some people might debate me on whether or not there's even a difference of the two. So curious what your take on that is.
I think the difference is mystery. Something can be spiritual, because here's the thing, like, we don't think this way typically, but even theology or just like studying the words of Scripture are spiritual because it's about the Spirit of God. Whereas like something that is mystical is less tangible. There's definitely mysterious. It's that other quality. Yeah. There's something to it that's undefinable. Whereas a spirituality, for the most part, we can define, we can, at least to a point, label it, put it in boxes, say, the Spirit operates this way or that way, or, whatever. Whereas mysticism is definitely more of, ooh.
No, it's interesting. I think I agree with you. And I think both actually do have a place in our Christian practices and Christian thought. Like there is this thing of it being spiritual just to read your Bible. And that's not, I wouldn't say that's mystical.
It can be.
But that's true. But then there's like the more mystical practices of just kind of meditating on the things of God and knowing like the both ands and meditating on all of the both and stuff of Scripture and of God, of how like, some stuff might seem contradictory that really aren't. Right. I'm even trying to think of like a lot of this I get from like the Orthodox people that I've been around and I've kind of learned from. And I was like, okay, so there's this mystery of the Scripture. There's mystery of like predestination because, there's like God might know the future, but also we do have freedom and we keep trying to solve which one is it, predestination or free will. And then you have the Orthodox over here, like it's a mystery. And I'm like, I actually like that. I think there's a place to embrace the mystic in our own Christian thought.
Yeah, I'm trying to learn to be okay with that. That's where I'm at.
It can be tough.
That's where I'm at currently.
You haven't grown with it. It's tough.
Yeah, I have definitely have a fascination and a growing love affair with more Eastern type thinking. But also, it's very, very hard for me to go there because I just want to understand everything.
Yeah. That's more like that Western world we grown up in as like we have to understand and define everything. And it makes spiritual isn't necessarily that difficult, but sometimes the mystic, it's hard to get there. And Indiana Jones, a lot of the times, in my opinion, it avoids a lot of the spiritual and really drills down on the mystic parts.
Right. Well, mystical makes a better movie.
It's true. It's more fun. And also, you know, you don't get people going, wait a minute, you said this religion's true when ours isn't.
Right.
Nope. Sure didn't.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
So instead, if it's all true in some way, and these objects do have some sort of mystical power, whether it is the power of God attributed to them in the Bible or something else, there is some kind of other that is associated with these quote unquote sacred objects. Yeah. And so they're able to honor that and give these objects power through mysticism without giving credence to one particular religion or another.
Yeah. Well, and I think it tickles a fundamental part of what it means to be human, which I think both of us would argue is because God placed it there, and other people will argue other reasons, that we have this desire for something more than just this world, something other. And Indiana Jones gives you that. It doesn't define it, so you're not sitting there having to struggle with, oh, now I know what it is, and I have to decide this way or not. It just gives a little bit of a tickle to that. There's something more, you know?
Right.
Yeah. All right, so let's drill down on some of the religions they do talk about real quick. So we'll start with the first, Raiders of the Lost Ark. We see Judaism. Pretty blunt and out there. You know, we're introduced to the Ark of the Covenant, a Jewish religious artifact. How well do you think that artifact was portrayed? I know you talked some about it already, but just if you want to add anything to that.
I mean, it looks like the Ark.
That's true. The whole touch it and you die thing happens. That's important.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's in the Bible, both Hebrew and Christian Bible. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, and I just, you know, he busts open a Bible to learn about it, to talk about it, Yeah,
that's one of the things that's really interesting too, is like archaeologists really do use the Bible. You know, it might not be always exactly what it says, and we're able to trace it and figure out exactly where artifacts are. But it is something that I learned in school, that they rely on a lot of this text because it does help explain what was happening in the ancient world and what these things may or may not be. Yeah,
it's one of the. I don't want to say this because I don't necessarily think of it that way, but it is one of the oldest historical texts that we have.
Yeah, and it's not always history, but when it is history,
right? I was going to say whether it's telling literal history or not, or these are stories that mean something else.
Yeah,
that's an entirely different conversation. But
one of my favorite things pointed out to me in a book. I was reading Exodus by Richard Friedman, who is a Jewish religious scholar. And he talks about, and it's just really interesting, all these artifacts we find that a lot of the times they're attributing it one way or the other. And they're saying in his opinion, a lot of other religious scholars won't define it based on the biblical text because, you know, that's taking like a religious stance on it. And he goes, but hear me out. If we found it the other order, if before we had the Bible, we had these artifacts, and all of a sudden you dug up these writings, the scholars would absolutely use those writings to say this is what the artifact is. It's just because we had the writings first that they're not doing that. And he says that actually is a logical fallacy, doesn't make any sense. And I'm like, oh, yeah, he kind of has a point. So I love the way he kind of brought that out of like the order we find stuff in sometimes changes how we interpret archaeological findings. Yeah. Also, for those wondering, I do have an entire shelf of just archaeology books. Like Indiana Jones created an obsession for me that will never die.
That's fascinating. Yeah. I mean, I don't right now because I think they got lost in a flood or in a move or something like that. But I was mythology for me when I was young. I had a whole library like this of encyclopedias that was just mythology.
That's awesome.
Like there was a whole library of Greek mythology. There was Hittite and Babylonian mythology. Ooh. There was all this. Yeah. Lots of it. So
yeah, one of my favorite devotionals I have. I don't even know if it counts as a devotional. It's called A Myth Made Fact, and they literally take the Greek stories, like the Greek gods, and then afterwards say biblical text. Here's what the moral of that story, how it fits into the Bible, and what we should do with it. And I was like, oh, sure. That's so much fun. Also, just the way that they reword it, because sometimes you read. It's almost like people try to be too smart when they rewrite like the stories of the Greek gods. They want it to sound really intelligent, and I'm like, no, just dumb it down for me. Give it to me as it is, you know? Yeah.
Right.
But do you think in this film, Raise the Lost Ark, do you think it was trying to make any statements about like how real God is or anything? Or is it just, like we said earlier, just kind of a mystic thing? This object does have some power. Make of it what you will.
I don't think that there's enough dialogue or things that happen that are like specifically Judeo-Christian in a way to give credence to, the God of the Bible as. But, it's more that mysticism. I think by being mystical, like Spielberg allowed himself to like both honor religion, but not come out and also plant a flag in the ground and say this is real and this is true.
Yeah, I think the most it played a part, and why it's important that there was some power to it, is because this was also commenting on all of the films that are World War II and Nazis enslaving the Jewish people and all of that, and I think it was important to see the Jewish artifact. If you really pay attention, one of the things the movie's trying to show you is the James Bond character, the action hero, doesn't save the day. Indiana Jones does not save the day. He just happens to be there. Like,
right.
The Ark did all the work. He just was there. And I think that's what was interesting is like you see the power of what is sacred to that community saves the community. Jones is just there. All right. So, yeah, we might have a lot of the similar answers of like, nope, just mystic, doesn't say, as we drill through some of these. Hinduism is the next one, Temple of Doom. Talked a lot about that already. As far as like neither of us are practicing Hindus, and as far as I know, I have never been.
Right.
So,
yeah, I don't know enough about Hinduism to say how accurate it is. My concern is that they're portrayed. Well, at least the one cult is. Obviously, they're the bad guys.
Yeah, we talked about this some on our Hinduism episode, like how Hinduism's just portrayed in a bunch of different fandoms over on YouTube. I think it's interesting how they did this because they were trying to make a commentary on like the Rambo kind of movies of like the indigenous people always being savages and bad. But at the same time, it does still bug me a little bit that we see two groups of Hindu believing people in the film. One are a poorer, very benevolent, kind community that believes in the stones, holds close to Shiva, all that stuff. And then you have the cult that's all bad guys and savages. And you don't really see just normal people who happen to be Hindus, which is a vast majority of people who believe in Hinduism. So, but again, it was trying to make a commentary of like how films show other people. And I think it was, I will give it to the film. One thing I like that it didn't just show them all as bad guys. It showed both and. Right. So that was good, but still more normal people would have been great.
Yeah. And I just don't know enough about Hinduism or like if those stones are something that are supposed to be real and exist or if they were made up for the movie. I don't know.
They were loosely based on like I forget how to say it. It's like the Sylvanglia or something like that. Which are basically just stones that hold part of the story of Shiva, which it's it's interesting.
Yeah.
It was a good MacGuffin. And I think I do like how one thing, when you see the Ark of the Covenant, the first film, it's like this power and it destroys everybody. I think it was really interesting how the stone, its power was keeping the village alive, people healthy and not dying and getting sick. So I thought that was an interesting, different kind of power that the artifact had in this film. And I would argue, again, not saying about these things in real life, just saying as far as like the stories in the films, I think the power of healing is maybe more important and closer to the heart of God than the power of things just fall over dead. Maybe, but.
Right. Well, yeah. I mean, so death was never supposed to be.
Yeah.
And, nor was judgment or any of that. But that is all a result. That's all a response to the fall and what have you. So I would agree. I think the healing and like the positivity and the grace and the mercy and all of those things, I can't say they're more a part of God than judgment because then you have to get into like divine simplicity and some of that stuff, which is an entirely different conversation. But
fun conversation though.
Just Just means to say God's not made of parts.
Mm-hmm.
He's not part this thing and part that thing and part whatever. They are all completely God.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot how like people think of the fruits of the Spirit, but it's the fruit of the Spirit. It's not like I get love and peace and you have joy in this. No, they're all the fruit of the Spirit. One fruit, all those things. Anyway, moving on. We'll go on to, I classify this as Catholicism, which I know is a branch of Christianity, but it seems specifically Catholic that they're talking about in The Last Crusade. When we see the Holy Grail, we see Sean Connery's character being a Catholic believer, all that kind of stuff. Just what I do think it was interesting how the Holy Grail was treated and how like there was this puzzle and mystery to it, not just like the mystic part of its power, but also like a mystery of which one is the Grail? Is it the big shiny thing or is it more the humble cup?
Is it the carpenter's cup? Yeah. Made from wood.
Yeah, I thought that was really well done. I really appreciate that. Even though, I don't believe in those kind of artifacts the same way that maybe some of your other Catholic and whatever people believe. I don't think there's some cup that Jesus touched and now has magical powers. But I do think that if God was trying to show me a thing, it's probably not the big shiny thing. It's probably the more humble, simple thing in front of me.
I'm open to the possibility.
All right. That's fun.
As the past couple years, I've been leaning more into trying to understand the supernatural, the unseen realm, haunted cosmos, all that kind of stuff, and just getting into the awareness that there is absolutely more than what we see at play.
Yeah.
So who knows? Maybe there is. And maybe it does have power, and that's why God won't let us find it.
That would be cool.
Because he won't let his power be abused.
And we would absolutely abuse it.
But it's out there somewhere. Yep.
Yeah. Oh, man. And I think this artifact also leans more into a little bit closer to that heart of God of like, it's not about look and touch, you're dead, and more of that. Again, I don't think the movies are doing this intentionally. I just think it's interesting, personally. I think it's a coincidence, but that healing, the healing factor that, hey, you're on the verge of death, but this will heal you. This is life-giving, not life-taking. And I thought that was a lot really interesting. Also, I think it's pretty accurate to the heart of what Christianity is all about. It's about being life-giving and finding out what is eternal life and what does it mean for us in our time today. Yeah. So how, do you think anything about this film was trying to like say, again, I think we already said this earlier, but like, it just doesn't prove Christianity. Say Christians are right, but I think it was honorable still. Yeah.
I mean, definitely, for the, I think more so than in the other movies, you have to believe that Jesus came, there was a crucifixion, and whether he was God or not, he had some kind of power. Because for the story of the Grail to be true, the way it is in the movie, that he did bleed in the cup and it did give it power.
Yeah.
Like Jesus was real and he was somebody special.
And, I didn't even think of that. Like, I guess in context of the Indiana Jones series, nothing has to be true other than the Ark has power for the Ark to be the way it is. Like, it doesn't have to be that God exists for the Ark to be able to have the power it did. It doesn't have to be that Shiva is real for the stone to have the power it did.
Right, just that the Ark does have power, and then all of these mythologies were written around it because it had power. The Holy Grail does kind of imply that at least in the Indiana Jones universe, there was a Jesus. You don't have to think he's the God, but you have to think there was a Jesus, and he had some kind of power in this universe. Yep. You have to, or the Grail doesn't.
Yeah,
the Grail doesn't work.
That's fascinating. I've never drilled down on that, but I think that's the only artifact that's true of in all the series.
Which is interesting, considering Spielberg is Jewish.
That's fascinating. Yeah. Now that you point that out, man. Anyway, on to what might have been the most respectful take to what I will argue is the least respectful take on religion in The Crystal Skull. It doesn't have a religion per se, but what it does is like, also there is actually a mystery of these crystal skulls that are found. Like that is a thing in real life. We don't know what they are. This is,
It's just, it's
Well, I mean,
ancient aliens
could be. It's actually likely that they were supposed to be representative of what some ancient indigenous people thought of God or something like that. You know, that's fairly common. What I thought was disrespectful towards religion that, and you know, I'm not saying this makes it a bad movie or anything like that, but you know, if I'm thinking of it just as the religious commentary, this is the only movie that kind of points and says maybe religion is fake, because it's going, oh, hey, we're misunderstanding gods and angels. It was actually just aliens. And that's where these things came from. And I'm like, oh, that's not great.
Right. But that was the zeitgeist at the time that.
And I mean, that goes to like the meta narrative points. Yeah.
Like it was a meta narrative point. You know, the distant origins theory was like the big thing. And like, that's when Ancient Aliens was on TV and all that stuff.
I have a weird connection to. Before his passing, we had Michael Heiser on my other podcast a couple times, and I got to know him decently. He's a pretty cool fellow. Yeah, I liked him. And he was very offended at how they used his interview in Ancient Alien series, because they took what he said completely out of context to make it sound like something else. And he was very public with it. So I always thought it was interesting because like anytime I hear Ancient Aliens, I'm like, that's right. I think I might have been able to call Michael Heiser my friend. I never got permission to call him my friend, but we talked. So I'm calling him my friend. Was very offended at his role in that. And I was like, that's interesting. Yeah.
Was that whole church?
Yeah. He was, I thought it was good. There's definitely some stuff that I disagree with him about, but there are a lot of stuff that I learned quite a bit from. So yeah.
Yep. It was definitely the window to me for thinking
his
that
Divine Council
more.
Stuff is really interesting. That should be in an Indiana Jones film at some point. Right? We have to find something of the Nephilim and anyway. Yeah. So that is kind of what the thing was. And especially at the time, you have a lot more movies being anti-religious, you know, and a lot more sci-fi being popular at the time. So I think that was the meta narrative. It was just trying to point out this is what film is doing. But if you're just taking like in universe, this is the thing that was like more of an antithesis to religion at all, you know, I guess, compared to a lot of the other stuff.
Yeah. We just don't understand these things. They're not religious at all.
The Ark of the Covenant actually was just part of a spaceship that fell off. Sorry. This just, again, bottom of perfection, but very much the bottom. I'm going to move on to a movie that I think we both like a little bit more. Will was originally going to be on this episode with us, and he is not a huge fan of this. So this is what you get, Will. You're not here, so we're only going to praise Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. What I thought, and maybe I'm wrong about this film kind of treated philosophy and mathematics and science as the religion, which is interesting because I think that's pretty accurate to today's culture. Is we treat those things as the sacred things. Yeah. Do you want to comment any on like how that was done?
Yeah. Philosophy less, I think, actually. There's a lot, not in the movie, but I mean, as a society, there's actually a push away from philosophy, from people honoring and understanding philosophical arguments, things like that. From the other side of the aisle, Neil deGrasse Tyson has noticed the same thing. He has gone on to say that if we would teach philosophy, religion would die.
That's fascinating. I find I'm trying to word this right,
because they tackle the same kinds of questions. You know, philosophy asks, "What is truth? Like, what is the ontology of a thing? Right, the nature of its being. What is its, all of those. It's the same questions that religion asks, but it tries to arrive there logically rather than spiritually and mystically.
Interesting. I enjoy listening to Tyson. I think a lot of his stuff's really interesting. Obviously don't agree with him on all things, but it's, what's interesting though is like philosophy, if you just like trace like all throughout history, and we don't have time to do everything I would like to talk about with philosophy right now. A lot of our current sciences was just once upon a time philosophy. Then we just verified it. That was it. Everything about like cells and atoms.
Yeah, absolutely true.
The atom was thought of like 1,000 years before we discovered the atom, just based on some Greek philosophers around the same time as Archimedes, just kind of doing stuff of like, you know what? It seems like everything would have to be made up of smaller things. And like they came up with the prime thing, which would be an atom, which turns out that's not even true because, you have electrons, protons, whatever. But then you get into string theory. But it all started with that kind of thing way back then. And what's fun is that Christians argued with it way back then.
Yep.
So you had Christianity versus science before there was science.
Yep.
So that's fun. Then you get to a lot of our philosophies actually even confirm Christianity. So a lot of your stuff of like Christian thoughts or apologetics started with a philosopher.
Right. Well, Augustine was one of the first ones. He was really kind of the big, but then the whole art of what they call Thomism, which is Thomas Aquinas, and the Summa Theologica, that's all philosophy, just with with God as the answer to all the questions.
Yeah. So like Immanuel Kant. Yeah, he actually did a lot of philosophy around this whole idea of like, there can't be a God, all this other stuff, and actually even came to his own philosophical, just using logic alone, starting at zero, said, I think there has to be a God.
Ontalism.
And it's interesting how much philosophy, if you're just doing it on its own, ends up pointing to a God. That's a whole research thing you have to do on your own, though, guys. But But I think the thing that's interesting is, obviously, I don't think philosophy can get you to the Christian God specifically, but it can get you to a God. Yeah.
Right. No,
and of course, there are philosophers who use the same kind of thinking to say there can't be a God. Again, it's not specifically target Christianity. It's just a way of thinking.
Right.
And in the Greek times, that is what ruled. Mm-hmm. That was their sacred thing, was philosophy, philosophers. That's what this movie explored in The Dial of Destiny. And it ties very closely to how in our own time, math and science is what we treat as what is sacred a lot of the time, which the perfect person to embody all of that is Archimedes, who was a philosopher and a mathematician. So they bring in the Anacathera, the Dial of Destiny, whatever you want to call it, Archimedes' dial. That is the religious MacGuffin of the film. It's not religious. And yet it is still treated just the same as Ark of the Covenant, Holy Grail, and all of that. Do you think they were trying to say something by, instead of having a religious artifact, having something else and still treating it that way? Or do you think that just was the MacGuffin and I'm thinking too deep?
No, I think we're getting into the meta again. And also just understanding, honestly, in the climate of right now, I don't know. Like, first of all, what religious artifact could they find? Could they pick? Mm-hmm. That is, as well known. Although,
the Holy Grail and the Ark are kind of the big ones.
Yeah,
they already did that.
Yeah. So there's that. But two, I just don't know. Like, religion in movies just doesn't go very well right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's, I'm going to blame everybody. That's what I'm going to do. Because you have the people who aren't religious, who anytime something religious gets shown are upset, and you're teaching my children this, that, and the other. And anytime religion is shown, if it's not shown exactly the way one person wants, you have the religious community going, well, that's not right. That's not what we believe, this, that, and the other. Or even if it's absence, the amount of people who are just upset that A Wrinkle in Time didn't include some of the religious stuff, including some of the hosts on this show. Which I haven't read Wrinkle in Time, so I can't comment on it, but it's kind of like...
I haven't either.
It's kind of like, it's hard to do and not offend somebody. And by that, I mean, it's impossible in today's world, I think, because we're just that polarized.
Right. Yep. So I absolutely think that that's part of it. But there's also, more than ever, I feel like there's become a resurging obsession with the ancients. And that there's some lost gnosis that we've forgotten, and that they were far more advanced than we think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Or even that in some ways that we are. I mean, we have electricity and computers and things like that, but mechanically, the ancients were far more advanced than we are.
Well, what's interesting is, like, that was my biggest thing I reacted against in this movie, that I immediately had to go, wait, the movie isn't saying this for itself. It's saying that is what movies of this time are saying, and it is right. That is what movies of our time is saying. So when they went back, it's like, they thought it was a dragon, but really it was an airplane. And I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm pretty sure the ancient people are smart enough to know something isn't a lizard. They might not be able to understand what it is, but they could probably tell that
Right.
isn't a flying lizard. Like,
Right.
come on, guys. But again, the movie wasn't trying to say it for itself. It was kind of showing this is what we treat time travel like. And it's true. That is what we do in our time travel movies, unfortunately. Yeah.
But also, like, those are the kinds of criticisms and skepticisms that get lauded towards, like the Bible the most, but really all ancient writings is, okay, well, this was just something they didn't understand. It was this thing or that thing. They said it was a dragon or a spirit or whatever. Or maybe it was. Because these people were far more in tune with their land and their surroundings than we are. They were not distracted peoples as we are. So if something is weird or different, they would notice, hey, this thing is weird or different.
Well, it's kind of like C.S. Lewis's arguments where people against all the people who were like, oh, no, there wasn't miracles. They just didn't understand. And Lewis's argument is, no, the reason they called it a miracle is because they understood that wasn't possible. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that is why they called it a miracle, isn't it? But, even when I think of like some of that stuff of like them writing about dragons, or even like in the book of Revelation, it has like beasts and dragons and all this stuff. To me, also, there's this part of like literature at one point wasn't, here is the history of what happened verbatim. We're going to write down and, document it. It was more like they used imagery to make a different point. So sometimes when they said dragon, they were making a point of like what they thought of the Babylonian Empire or what they thought of this. So in Revelation, a lot of the times, in my opinion, when it talks about dragon or this, that doesn't necessarily mean there's going to be a sea monster that comes up. Maybe it's saying something about people and what we prioritize, what we think of as sacred that isn't sacred. Those kind of things, I think a lot of the times are what we're talking about.
Or it's Godzilla.
One can only hope. Yeah. But that does bring up what's interesting too, is like in all of these films, there's like, again, there's so many layers. We couldn't possibly do all of the meta narrative, and also how's religion treated, and also how good are the films? What are the best action scenes? We can't. It's been an hour. We've barely touched anything at all, basically. But one thing I do want to point out that I think is really interesting that these movies do, just to kind of show you one of the many layers. You get the religious thing of like, is the ark sacred? Is it really something of God? Is there something mystic there? What is it? But underneath that, you see Indiana Jones discovering for himself what is important to him, what is sacred to him. And I think that's really well shown in the Dial of Destiny, right? Like you have him struggling with Helena. She's chasing after this thing that her dad's been his whole life after. And he's like, do you really want to do that? And he's thinking back to when he did that with his dad and the thing that his dad obsessed over. And you see him struggling with going after this thing and fortune and glory and going, actually, I just wish I had my wife back. I wish my son didn't die in a war, and you see this like of all the things. And it's really, I think it just makes such a beautiful point in this last film of him going back and going, all of these things he once thought of as sacred, fortune and glory, even archaeology, even adventure itself. And him going at the end, what really mattered to him, it was his family. It was his friends. Even his last decision to still be Indiana Jones and keep doing adventures, it was based on his community, not based on a thrill of adventure, not based on wanting fortune and glory, not based on any of that stuff, but just wanting that community. And the community is what was truly sacred to Indiana Jones. And I think that's a really beautiful layer in all of these films, that we don't have to focus on the religious artifacts and were they right or not. We don't have to focus on the mystic parts if you don't want to. I think they're fun. But there's that underlining thing of what really is sacred to you individually. And what I think would be fun to get your commentary on is that also even goes to like some of our circles. A lot of times we debate theological and is it predestination? Is it not predestination? And underpinning all of that are these just Christians wanting to know how should they live their life in today's world. And sometimes our theological arguments that are really interesting aren't actually the point.
I struggle. Yeah, I struggle with that. Because you definitely definitely am part, and it's interesting that God has led me here and down this path. But the church where I attend and plugged in and all that stuff is, very much a get your head out of the clouds and your boots on the ground kind of. But I don't know. I think anything, whether it's just reading scripture in the plain sense, or it's theologizing and getting into the minutiae, whatever, there is value. And to be on topic here, there's sacredness to anything that gets us to think about God. That is, we may say, oh, well, theology is not practical. Really? The practical application is that you are spending hours and hours and hours thinking about God. That's that is practical, and that is tangible, and that is a good thing for us to do. If we are the bride of Christ, and we have this more, marriage type, I think about my wife all the time, and I, for lack of a better term, study her, right? I'm always learning more of her likes, dislikes, personality quirks. This makes her laugh. This doesn't, whatever, right? Why are we not studying God with the same fervor if we are his bride?
Yeah, I think it goes back to something you said earlier when we were talking about like what is sacred or what should be sacred, at least to Christians. Maybe it's not God alone is what's sacred, but everything from God is what we're considering that's sacred. And I think that's right. Where this is really funny because I'm kind of doing that theological bit, but I think that's where, to me, the doctrine of the Trinity is one of the most important doctrines, because who is God? At the base of who God is love. God is relational. And that's one thing I think this movie gets really right is community is what's sacred. For me, I think I had to be a little bit more specific. It's community with God and with people, both. So everything I do, whether it's studying theology, which I think is a very good thing, if my studying of theology is only polarizing me from other people and pushing me against community, I think I got it wrong. But if it's putting me closer and helping me understand more and loving my neighbor better, then that's a great thing. Same thing with the mystic. If I'm wrapped up in the mystic and it helps me appreciate and feel loved and feel that presence of God in the other and in and around me, then I think the mystic's a beautiful thing. But if I'm so obsessed with the mystic that I chase only after that, and I get into my own little bubble because I'm just constantly trying to find that next high, that next spiritual experience, well, then all of a sudden I'm not connected to the other. I'm not in community. Then I think I got it wrong. And then I go down all of these things I think that can add to what should be sacred, being that relational aspect of God and his people. It can be good or bad, but I have to nail down what is it that truly makes something of God.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I don't have anything to add to that. Sorry.
That's good.
I feel like I got a little preachy there, but
I can't help it. I get that way.
Yeah. Well, guys, it was religion in Indiana Jones. What'd you expect? And again, we barely touched Indiana Jones. We could do so much more. Let us know if you want us to do a series on it, because I would love to just really drill down into all the Indiana Jones. I would even do the young Indiana Jones series. That would be fun. Yeah. It's a great world. A lot of stuff to play with, a lot of things to think about when we think of like the sacred, the other, the mystic, adventure. Even just thinking of archaeology, is there actually a moral right to have it in a museum?
Right.
Yeah. There's a lot that we could dig into. So let us know if you want to cover more Indiana Jones, because again, I don't have a limit on how much I'm willing to talk about Indiana Jones. But with that, we're going to go ahead and wrap this one up. Guys, if you want that extra bonus question, go to Captivate, go to Apple Podcasts, subscribe, go to Patreon, and you can hear us answer. What one religious artifact would we like to go search for with Dr. Jones himself? We're going to be thinking about it. We'll answer that on the bonus. But for now, we're going to start with some recommendations. Just comics, games, anime, whatever you would, as far as like what you want to recommend to the audience. I'll go ahead and go first, let you think about it for a minute. I know this is a little bit old news, but Scotty Young just started a new comic that I haven't picked up yet, and it reminded me how much I love Twig. It's kind of a fantasy thing of like, what is your role and how much does what your role is supposed to be in the universe really matter? And it's just a fun little fantasy world, really colorful, lots of great art. It's a fun series. I also have him, a commission from him on the character itself and signed, and I'm going to frame that at some point. Probably be on my wall behind me eventually. Pretty cool. Anyway, Matthew Winter.
Yeah, it's funny. It's something that's been recommended to me for a couple years now from people who know my interests and things, and never really got around to it. But if you are fascinated and interested by all things weird and spooky and paranormal like I am, but also a Christian, if you haven't checked out Haunted Cosmos, check out Haunted Cosmos.
I am thoroughly fascinated.
Yep, the Haunted Cosmos podcast.
All right. Man, okay. Well, with that, guys, before you go over to that podcast, try and rate and review ours on Apple Podcasts. Hit the 5-star and the little bell in the corner if you're on Spotify, or if you're on your laptop, go over to podchaser.com. Leave us a rate and review there. It helps the algorithms think we're important, and we would appreciate that. Again, big thanks to Aaron Hardy for helping support our show. Check out other religious and fandoms episodes that we've done, and the link that's down in the description. And remember, we're all a chosen people, a geekdom of priests.
Check out our merch online at the SG Shop. There you can find clothing such as hat, extra soft t-shirts, sweaters, hoodies, and more things like glassware, mugs, bags, and posters. My favorite shirt design is the one that says all reading counts, so make sure you check out the store and find your new favorite merch.
Hey friends, this is your pal, Will Rose, and I have some exciting news. Systematic Geekology will return to Theology Beer Camp this year, October 17th through the 19th in Denver, Colorado. And we hope that you can join us. We are part of Theology Beer Camp in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, at my home church in my hometown. And that year, Theology Beer Camp was called the God Pods. And then we were in Missouri, a part of the Geek stage. Yes, we had a whole entire Geek stage where we had workshops and speakers and had incredible conversations. And Theology Beer Camp last year was called the God Pods Strike Back. So you kind of see where this is going. And so this year, the theme is the return of the God Pods. And so if you head over to Eventbrite and follow God Pods 2024, or hop over to Instagram, follow it there. And if you enter promo code Geekshire, you see what we did there? Yeah. Wilbo Baggins approves. If you enter Geekshire, all caps, no spaces, you'll get $25 off your ticket price. Geekshire, all caps, no spaces, Geekshire. Yeah, say it with me, Geekshire. Enter that. You get money off your ticket, and you can join us and hang out and drink beer and have great food. And even if you don't drink beer, you can have incredible food and beverages and conversations with your favorite hosts here at Systematic Geekology. The Geek stage is growing. I'm proud of that, and we thank Trip for this opportunity. We hope to see you at Theology Beer Camp, the Return of the God Pods 2024.